Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with dates and times in Python. I'll also be covering some examples of converting between different time zones as well. Working with dates and times is something that comes up quite frequently when building solutions with any programming language. For Python, there is a built-in library called datetime that can be used to simplify working with date and time-based data. So let's have a look at that. For reference, the version of Python I used in this video is 3.12.7, and if you would like a copy of the code examples for this video, the files are available on my GitHub page using the link in the description. That said, let's get started. As mentioned before, the datetime library is built into Python, so there is nothing other than Python to install. So let's take a look at a few examples. First, I'm going to make a new file, which I'll call dtexamples.py. Next, let's get the current date and time. To start with, we need to import the functions needed from the datetime library. In this case, I'll need date, datetime, time, and time delta. Next, I'll use datetime.now to get the current date and time and print it to the console. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And now right click, run Python file in terminal. And there we have the current date and time. Now, by default, the date is formatted as year, month, day. This is known as the ISO 8601 format. Now, next up, let's have a look at just getting the date. And we do that by just using something very similar, except we tack on .date at the end of it, and that'll just give us the date. So in full, it's datetime.now, parentheses, .date, parentheses again. Now run that file again. Then we've got just the date in the same format. And lastly, let's just show what the time is. I'll let you have a guess as to what that's going to be. Pretty much the same as what we did before, but instead of .date, we just use .time. Save that, run it again, and there's the time. So now we've shown a couple of examples of just working with the date and the time. Let's have a look at actually doing something meaningful with it. In this case, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take two dates and I'm going to deduct one from the other and come back with a difference in time. And we can do that very simply by taking the first date. So we just use date from datetime and then just specify a year, a month, and a day. And then we do that again, but we just use a different year, month, and day. In this case, I've given it almost a year. And then we just print out the difference by taking the first date minus the second one. So I'll just save that. And we see that the difference is 367 days. Now let's do the same again, but this time we'll use 2 times instead. It is a little bit different because the the time function doesn't actually allow for mathematical operations, so we have to use time delta instead. So we define a time that we want to use. So this case, 15 hours, 52 minutes, which is passed into time delta. And then we do that again, this time for time 2, which is 13 hours and 58 minutes. And then we just take time 2 away from time 1. And that just gives us our result. I'll do one last example now, and that will basically just cover both using the date and the time. So as you can see, we've got two variables again. This time using date time. We're specifying a year, a month, a day, hour, minute, and seconds. You can do milliseconds as well if you wish. There is an option for it. And then another variable with different values again. And then we just take the second away from the first, and that gives us our result. Moving on to the next part, another common occurrence that we work with when using dates and times is different formatted dates. There are 3 main date formats that are typically used. They are year, month, day, so that's the ISO standard, day, month, year, the European standard, and month, day, year, which is the US standard. Now, converting between these formats in Python is relatively easy to do with the datetime library. So let's have a look at a few examples of how to convert from the ISO format and flick between the European and US formats. So the first thing I want to do is set a current date variable with what the current date and time is now. That's just so that I can keep things consistent. And so what I'm going to do is just paste in this code block, which has 4 outputs. So the first one is what the current date is. That'll be in the ISO format. What the current time is, And what we're doing here is we're using a method called string, well, str ftime or string format time, which basically allows us to actually manipulate how the actual time or the date is represented. So in this case, we've got capital H, well, percentage capital H, percentage capital M, percentage capital S. What that basically means is hours, minutes, seconds, and the colon is just used as a separator. So pretty much how you normally represent time. Then we've got the USA date format, which again, we pass in the same thing. We're using current date, and then we're just using string format time. And this time we're doing percentage %M, which is a representation for month as a numerical value, %D, what the day is, and then %uppercase Y. The uppercase Y indicates that we want 4 digits for the year. And then we've got / just to separate those values up. Again, a typical representation. And then lastly, we've got one for European format or UK date format, whichever term you want to use. And that's pretty much the same as before, except %D and %M are swapped around. So I'll save that and run it. As you can see, we've got the default format in its normal presentation. So year, month, day, current time, no real changes there, except it did drop the milliseconds at the end. USA date format, so 11/14/2024, and then UK date format, 14/11/2024. Now, if you did want to change this slightly, so instead of saying, let's say, for example, 11 for the month, and you wanted it to say November, for example, then you can do that. Instead of saying %M, you can say %uppercase B, and that will print out basically the full name of the month. You might just need to work out how you want to present that, because doing it like April / whatever day or November / whatever date just doesn't make sense. So you probably just want to do something like that and then something like that. So it comes out a little bit cleaner. That wraps up working with just dates and times on their own. Let's take a quick look at working with dates and times over different time zones. Now, up until Python 3.9, I typically would have used a third-party library called PyTZ, but as of Python 3.9, it's pretty much been deprecated. The reason is that there's now a library in the standard Python library collection called ZoneInfo. That does most of what PyTZ provided, and it's recommended to use that going forward. Even projects like Django have started using it. So let's take a look at some examples. First, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make another file, and we'll start with a fresh slate so it doesn't interfere with that one. Not that it would anyway. I'll call that TZ examples. Close the other one and clear the screen. First off, I just need to do some imports. So first one is date and time again. And then after that, I've got zone info. I'm going to import available time zones, which I'm only going to use once. So it's just an example. You don't really need to use that. And then zone info. First up, let's have a look at what available time zones there is within this library. To do that, I'm just going to simply call the available time zones. I'll print it out. Now, if I remember correctly, this presents a set out to the console. So let's take a look. So run the file. As you can see, there's a lot of them. It's not in an ideal format. So I do have a spreadsheet available in the GitHub repository that does actually have a formatted list of these. So I'll just go and open that now. And there's the spreadsheet. And as you can see, it's just a list of standard time zone names. So if you want to use this, by all means, download it. Make it easy to go and find the time zone that you're looking for. Let me get rid of that for now. And for the moment, I'm just going to comment that out because I don't want that printing out all the time. Now that we've seen the list of time zones available, let's start using them. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a date and time format that I want to use so that when I convert between the time zones, it's pretty consistent. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use the UK format. So I'm going to do %D, so day, month, year, hours, minutes, seconds, and then percentage uppercase Z, and then in parentheses percentage Z. What this basically does is obviously takes the date and the time, but also tacks on the name of the time zone. So that's what percentage uppercase Z is. So it could be GMT, CET, and then what the time zone difference is. So that's what this is. So for example, if I take Paris, and that would show us CET, and then that would show us plus 1 hour. I think the actual depiction is plus 0100. Next, I'm just going to get the current date and time. Nothing different there. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm just going to do a simple print of what the current date and time format is using this particular date format. Go to the console, run the example again, and there we go. But there is a slight little problem, and that is, although I've got the date, I've got the time, I don't have what the time zone is, and I don't have what the difference is. Given that I'm in the UK, it would show as GMT, and the time zone difference will be 0000. Now, the reason for that is that because I've just used datetime.now up here, and then just printed it out as part of this, .now doesn't actually put the time zone as part of the actual data collected. So you need to tell it to add that to what is part of this particular variable. So what I need to do is one of two options. The first method is to basically just tell datetime.now what time zone to use by using the TZ parameter. Now, if I run that again, but I'm just going to basically do both so you can see what the original was and what the after that one was, you'll see it worked. Now, that's basically hard coding into datetime.now as to what time zone to use. So that might not be ideal. So what you can do instead is a second method, which is basically going to do the same thing, but instead what it'll do is go and get the time zone for the local machine. So all I'll do is just do datetime.now.as time zone, and then it'll just get whatever is presented to the system. So I comment that one out. Not that it'll make a difference anyway. And run that again. There you go. You see that we've now got GMT and what the time zone difference is. So for our last example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 different locations and effectively just show what the local time and date is there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of dictionaries that has the 3 locations. So I've chosen 3 capitals. We've got Paris, what the time zone is for that. So that's Europe, Paris. Washington, DC, so that'll be US Eastern. And then Canberra, which is Australia, Canberra. With that done, what I want to do next is go and just start printing out things. So I want the local time. So this will be what the time is where I live, which is in the UK. And then lastly, I'm just going to do a very simple for loop. That'll just go over the list and then basically print out what the location is, the time represents its time zone, and then we'll just tell it what time zone it is from each individual dictionary item, and then what format we want it in, and then that should be it. So I'm just going to run that again, and there we go. See, Paris time is showing us 1 hour ahead, so Central European. Washington, DC, Eastern Standard Time, minus 5 hours from GMT. And then Canberra is plus 11 hours AEDT. And that's just a few examples of how you can use the date, time, and zone info libraries in Python. As you can see, working with time zones and dates and times with Python is pretty easy to do. Everything's built in, so there's nothing to install. Working with dates and times is something that's done quite a lot in Python, along with other languages. The examples are some of the most common ones that are done outside of using pandas, for example. You might need to bring pandas in to do some more advanced stuff if you wanted to. There are some other options for working and manipulating date and time data, so what I would encourage you to do is have a look at the date, time, and zone info library documentation, as there's still plenty of other stuff that you can do within those 2 libraries. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.